All right, today we're going to talk about recovering from mid-game funk. And this is, across all sports, right? This is kind of the big thing of things can be going great, like everything going your way. You're playing well, whatever. Your mind's in the game, and then all of a sudden, like one little mistake happens, and then that I like to call it the sewer cycle because then once we make that mistake or somebody makes that mistake, well, then we just start, we think so much about the mistake that it just starts this cycle of negative thoughts and then more mistakes. And what ends up being like the big problem is that, especially with younger people, I think, because they might not really, understand the whole context, but the thought becomes whatever I do, don't do that anymore. But the way the brain works is if I try to, you might hear this example, they I've seen this quite a bit, where like if I tell you to not think of a pink elephant, what do you think of?
I just thought of a pink elephant.
A pink elephant, right on. So it's the whole idea of, well, to not think about a specific thing forces you to think about that thing. So then it's this whole deal of trying to really just change that perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. So what's interesting is, like, I've thought about it, and I mean, it seems to be the same thing as we've been working on, right? Is replacing the bad thoughts with the good thoughts. And it seems so simple, but obviously it's not, until you've gotten really, really good at it. And what I've seen that kind of intrigues me is, like, we can get into a situation where we are down. Let's say we're down by 5, 6, 7 runs, and we can come back from that. But it seems like if a pitcher has a bad time, that seems to be worse. So let me kind of explain that. So for whatever reason, when a pitcher doesn't do well in the first inning and runs are scored, everything kind of just flattens out, versus, let's say a pitcher does well, but they just the guys are just hitting a lot. Well, then we tend to come back. So I think it's this kind of mindset of the pitcher's not throwing strikes, and then the rest of the guys are feeding into that, or they're kind of upset about that. And then they start making errors because the pitcher's not doing well, right? Versus, like I said, if the pitcher's doing well, the other team's just hitting the ball. Like, it's two different scenarios, same outcome. Mm-hmm. They're still scoring runs either way, right? So if they're hitting the ball and they're scoring runs, versus if the pitcher is not throwing well, he's walking batters, they're scoring runs. But they're able, what I've seen is they're able to come back easier when the pitcher is throwing well, but the hitters are just scoring runs. Do you understand? So what happened on Sunday was essentially our pitcher wasn't doing well. This was one of our good pitchers. He wasn't doing well. First inning, I left him in throughout the first inning, and they scored maybe three runs. And then for the rest of the game, it was kind of like just completely flat. I'm getting them in a huddle, trying to bring them back up, trying to do whatever I can. And then the last inning, they finally start to come back a little bit, but it was just too little too late. They couldn't score enough runs. And it's happened before that way. And kind of what I come up with is it seems to be that they get down whenever the pitcher isn't throwing well. If the pitcher's throwing well and the other team's just hitting the ball, it's kind of like, in their head, it's like, well, they're just hitting the ball. Let's get some outs. It's very weird to me, because it's the same. If they score 3 runs because they're hitting well versus they score 3 runs because my pitcher's not doing well, that should be the same situation.
Do Do they talk much as a team during these times, like whether it's the outcome or whether things are going the way they want or not? What's their just from
I I see a lot, and that's what we've actually been going over this a lot, is talking through the situation, whether positive or negative, talking through, making sure you're cheering on your teammates. And it seems like I have to get them up a lot. It's me and the other coaches have to force it a lot of times, and they're doing it because we're telling them to do it. And
yeah
that's another thing that I'm glad you brought that up, because it's something that I wanted to mention is like, what is the trick, or maybe there's not a trick. How can I get these boys to understand that them cheering on their teammates is, number one, their job, excuse me, and number two, it helps them in turn, right? Now, it's great when everything's going great. They're yelling and screaming and hollering and cheering for each other, slapping high fives, all that. But when it's not going great, sometimes it's like pulling teeth. Now, sometimes they do it, but sometimes they don't.
I mean, I think like most things, it would just be practice and repetition, right? The
Just
coaches
reinforce,
continuing,
reinforce, reinforce.
yeah, continuing to encourage that. Whenever like there's this process I like to go through, and I can't remember if I talked about it much with your players, but it's called like the 4 Fs, right? And this can happen when somebody makes a mistake, and the first F is, even though I don't have this checked off as made for kids, I'll go ahead and use better language. But the first F is fudge, or might be another F word.
Gotcha.
And
Yeah,
the
you
point
talked
of that
about
one,
that.
yeah,
You
yeah.
talked about it in the
And,
clinic.
okay. And the point of that is, or that first F right there, is that we can't stop emotional responses, right? You're going to have an emotional response to a mistake and an error. And that first F is letting players know, coaches know, whoever, that it's okay to be upset, right? We can't we can't like be some sort of a, I don't know, like a statue with our emotions to where we don't feel the positive and the negative. But that first
Yeah.
step is that, like, it's okay, be upset, right? And there's some information about emotional responses, and they just happen so fast that it just happens. But you don't want to dwell in that very long. And then that second F is fix. So you do actually think about the error for a moment and you fix it, and it can be fixed in, most of the time in that particular context, they talk about a visualization practice, and you can see people oftentimes like close their eyes and maybe they go through the action again to whatever the mistake was. If assuming it was physical, how about I say that? Assuming it was a physical mistake, then you take a minute or two and just sort of go through it. If a pitcher's on the mound, they don't have a minute or two, so we have to figure out a way for it to be a little bit quicker there. Maybe it's just some deep breaths within that time. After that second F, the third F is to forget, and I think this is the hardest one. It's okay to be upset. Take a few seconds to fix the error. If it was physical, if it wasn't physical, then just move on to the forget phase. And the way we can speed up that forgetting is the last F, which is focus or refocus.
Yeah.
Focus on the next play, focus on the next at bat, or focus on your teammates. So, and I think
Yeah.
that's a big one too, is you get over that error in those first 3 Fs by turning your attention to your teammates and starting to lift them up, whatever the case may be. And I think with that, like most things, right, reinforce that cycle, and then they can start to learn that that it doesn't always have to happen in that particular order. Maybe there's more of a focus on the focus to help boost teammates, because it sounds like to me, or if I think back to my T-ball days, it would be the pitcher. And please correct me if this is not the right way to explain it, but to me, I think of the pitcher is kind of like, in that moment anyway, being like the quarterback, being the leader, kind of like controlling a lot of the things there. And if he starts to make some errors or starts to get down, well, then his teammates are going to feel that. Not only do they all want to play well and win, but they're friends, and they probably don't want their friend to feel the way they do. So it's maybe thinking of it in that context too, and just getting everybody to just that, right? Just build each other up.
Yeah, I mean that's so those 4 steps. It's funny because I remember you talking about in the clinic, but I didn't like memorize those steps, right? Um, but that's exactly what we go through. It's exactly what we go through. So we're doing the right thing. I think it's just reinforcing it and making sure that we're constantly going over it. Um,
Yeah.
because I'll go to the mound and I'll tell them all the time, like, instead of saying F it or fudge it, I'll say, you know, forget about it. It's over. What do we need to do next? And then I'll tell them to, take their breaths. And then, like you said, with the focus point, a lot of times, like I'll give them something to focus on, like focus on that W on your glove, focus on the R on your glove, focus on the mound for, as long as you can, and then rechannel.
Yeah.
So that, I mean, we're doing exactly that. So, we're saying the right things. I think we're doing the right things. It's just a matter of reinforcing it enough until it becomes second nature to them and they're doing it on their own.
Yeah. Yeah. And in the season like this, I know it's like easy for me to say what I'm about to say because I'm not the one going through it, but also try to think too of like thank the Lord this is something that they're struggling with now, and they get an opportunity to work on it with you. So that if it's harder right now, the more struggle they go through right now at this age, the better they're going to be at the other side of it. So just
Yeah.
trying to just kind of be in that moment and think that way of like, hey, let's do this, right? Let's deal with this people getting down this mid-game funk, and let's figure out how to work through it now, because next season and the season after that and the season after that, we're just going to be so much better than everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. We talk about that a lot too, is going, because fall is that's what it's all about, is figuring things out for the spring and summer. Cause that's what really matters. Right.
Yeah,
So we talk about that all the time, is going through these struggles now are a good thing because we're getting ready and we're trying to fight through all this. We also talk a lot about, the, recognizing and acknowledging the emotions, right? So
yeah,
recognize, okay, you're sad or you're angry. That's usually the 2 responses. Notice it's there. Okay, now it's over.
yeah, yeah,
And trying to move them on quicker to getting to that focus point,
yeah. And that can really be a big part too of mindfulness, like a mindfulness meditation. And I know younger athletes, it's sometimes hard for them to take that seriously. So you can
Yeah.
frame it in different ways. But if you get into mindfulness, there is this idea of separating yourself from the error or the mistake or whatever. So it's like, I don't identify as that mistake, right? I'm not the mistake. It's just a thing that happened. But then it's sort of making it objective, right? So this is a thing. It's not good or bad, and I think that language there is important too, because like we always talk about the whole win or learn thing. Making a mistake is just an opportunity to learn, but then you kind of separate that, right? It's not good or bad. It's just a thing that happened, and then again, repeating that process of that separation, should help to reinforce those other steps, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think where mindfulness can get it's kind of weird at times, but maybe understanding the point. They talk about oftentimes in these particular type of moments, referring to yourself in the third person. So it's not like, I made this mistake. It's Kyle made this mistake. Seems a little bit odd to do, but it is that, now you're at this third person perspective and you're kind of separating yourself from the particular thing.
That makes sense. Yeah, I like that. I think you told me that before, but it was in brief, so it really
Yeah.
didn't register. Um, yeah.
And it can be kind of another way to frame that same thing is, talking to your players of like how would you treat your friend if they made that same mistake? And they would say like, oh, I would probably tell them it's okay. I would want to build them up and let them know that, we're going to do this. And then it's the same again, like if you change that, or I'm going to talk about myself in the third person. Well, now I'm talking to myself like I'm my friend. And I'm going to build up my friends. I'm going to make them feel good. I'm going to let them know that, hey, it doesn't really matter.
I'm writing this down because that's a good one too, man. I like that a lot. Let me see.
Right on, right on. And if you click the link down here in the show notes for just $19.99, you can have your very own with 37 payments of $400. You can have your very own. I don't know.
So something I noticed yesterday. Remember, I told you I would come up with something at practice. So this is interesting. So we're running through rundown scenarios between third and home, second and third. And so essentially what we did is we set up a runner at third, a runner in between second and third. So the runner at third would get into the rundown, and then we'd get that out, and then you had to immediately try to get this other guy that's halfway to third. Okay. So all that's kind of irrelevant with what I'm getting to, but I just wanted you to know the situation. So we're running through that and we keep making mistakes. And what's funny is that it's so simple. It's a simple task and these guys can do it. But because they made the mistake in a game, it's kind of like going on for 2 weeks now, is like they keep panicking. That's another thing we're seeing a lot too, is, or not a lot, but every once in a while we get into a play where they just panic and freeze, right? And so trying to get them to relax in these situations, which I think is, similar to the exposure therapy type thing, right? Just expose them over and over and over and over until they don't panic anymore. But I was wondering if there's something that we can do other than just keep putting them in that situation, because I don't want to. It almost seemed like a waste going through 30 minutes of them making mistakes on something that they know how to do, and it's a simple thing, but because they made the mistake during the game, they keep going and making mistakes. Now, I'm not saying like we did it over and over. They got some really well, but they made mistakes too, which a rundown should be a very simple, easy thing, but it's because of the mistake during the game that they now in practice, it's kind of like,
Yeah, yeah. I do think exposure response, so that that's like exposure response type of a therapy, which can be very effective for a lot of different things. I do think that's key, and in that too, you'd want to have some way for them to have a little bit of skin in the game, like whatever the case might be, right? So you set up those lower anxiety game like situations, and then just repeat it, and they do end up performing better in the higher anxiety or the higher stress situations. One thing you might try, going back to some stuff we haven't really talked about it a lot in a while, or not on this podcast, but back to some stuff on practice. So purposeful practice, deliberate practice. If we take a page out of Anders Ericsson's work on deliberate practice, you might want to, if it is a repetition of a similar mistake, you might want to set it up to where you can stop them at that mistake. And I don't really know how it goes. Like, do they make the mistake and then you still try to keep them like let's keep going, let's get it finished, right? Let's get the guy out. Or at the mistake, is it stop? And then you kind of hone in on that mistake. So, right. So it's, I don't know if you reset the scenario or how it works, but then you just go back and you find a way to hone in on that one thing and you really just drive that in, right? Repetition, 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 mindful repetition, like we've talked about. It can't be mindless. That does nothing. That causes more errors for mindless repetition. But anyways, is it set up that way to where is it a similar mistake and it's stopped and then that's repeated, or?
Yeah, what we can do is, and we did this a couple times yesterday, where I just, I would say, okay, stop. And we'd stop them and freeze them in that position and show them what went wrong, So, yeah, I mean, that's easy to do in those situations, pretty much in any, baseball mistake. As soon as the mistake's made during practice, you can stop them and pause them and show them like, you're in the wrong spot, or you threw too far, I mean, we could definitely do that. We did it a couple times yesterday, but we could probably do that a lot more. Like exactly where the mistakes made, put them in those spots. So, like, let's say somebody kept running. Okay, go back over here, put them in that spot. Here's where the mistake happened, and here's what you need to do differently.
Yeah, and then repeat it right there, like whatever you can.
Yeah.
And there's like mentioning the stuff with Erickson's research on practice and deliberate practice and stuff. A lot of the things that he uncovered by watching videos of people mindfully practicing is the ability of the higher level performers to be able to identify the mistake themselves, right? So they know enough about it where they can self-identify the error, and then they don't make the error and then just keep going. They make the error and stop, and then it's several minutes of just working through that error, right, to make sure. I think of it as like back whenever we memorized stuff as a kid, right? We would memorize the first line. Maybe people still memorize this way: the first line, and then the first two lines, and then the first three lines. But we just repeat, 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 and then the first four lines. So we never move on to line five if we haven't memorized line four. And
Yeah.
it's kind of a similar thing in sequence. Things that happen need to happen in a specific sequence. You memorize it in sequence.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. Okay.
And I wonder too, kind of the dynamic out there. Like if they're doing something and you automatically make them stop, they're probably already starting to think like, "Oh crap! Like what did we do wrong now?" And I don't know if that's their attitude, but maybe trying to find a way to mitigate that too, to where, especially in practice, right? Like they don't ever need to feel down or bad or sad about something in practice. It's just, that's why they're there. Like we said before, thank goodness they're making those mistakes with you there as their coach. But trying to, again, get everybody to understand, like, yeah, that's a building moment. This is a good thing. Like, thank goodness we're working on this right now.
Yeah. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
What about can you think back to your baseball career? What was like biggest mistake, or can you think of big mistakes that you had and how you would work through them, or was there a consistent thing that popped up?
Um, I mean, it's funny you asked that because that's why. Remember, I told you about the first guy, Chad Durbin, that I want to have on the podcast. So he played. I don't remember how many years in the pros, but he played a while in the pros, and then now he has a very high level club organization and a training center, and he's one of those guys that's very black and white. He's your typical pro pitcher. Um, he he never really had an issue with the mental aspect of baseball. Like it was almost like he was genetically set up to be a pitcher. Um,
Which I don't believe that we can have that be that way genetically, but continue.
we can talk about that because I'm sure I will see your point.
Of
But man,
course.
there's just some quirkiness that goes to the type of person that's a pitcher. It's almost like they're so quirky that well, quirkiness a lot of time it is different than other people, but they're so different from other people that they're almost immune to the emotional response of getting angry or upset.
Yeah, yeah.
And I can use Brock as that example. Like Brock is not eh, he's not affected by anything when it comes to baseball. Like he's not affected by errors. He's not affected by his team doing bad, doing good. Like he's just even kill all the time. And it's nothing. I mean, we've talked about it, and he's heard me talk about it with Max because Max is different in that way, but he doesn't. And he's been that way ever since he was a little kid. But anyway, um, let's talk about that after I get through this.
Okay.
So Chad, that's why I wanted him to come on the podcast is because he played with me and I wanted to kind of go over the difference of when we were kids versus now, right? Especially when it comes to the mental component of baseball. And with me, I struggled through so much of depression, anxiety, Tourette syndrome, all that stuff, that baseball was my getaway. Like that was my medicine, let's say. And I did have some struggles with the mental approach and getting down on myself. I'm very much like Maxwell, being such an emotional person. And, but see, my dad at a very young age, he worked on visualization, meditation, all this stuff that I thought was just ridiculous as a kid, but I did it because he made me do it. Right. And I think for me, I don't remember, like, I'm not going to sit here and say I didn't make mistakes, because I'm sure I did, but I don't remember mistakes being made. Um, I just remember getting down on myself and picking myself back up because I knew how to.
Yeah.
I knew
Yeah.
what to do, right? So I knew what to do, and what, like, this whole fix it, forget it, and focus, like, that was, I mean, that's exactly what my dad taught me. I mean, it was, but he was, he was very forward thinking in the world of cognitive behavior therapy. Like, he knew that when I was a very young age. So he taught me that because he knew that's what I needed with my other problems in life. So he brought it straight into baseball. And it's funny because he would make our team. I remember when he only coached me for a few years, but as a really young kid, maybe like 8, 9, he would make us meditate before practices.
Really.
And like the kids and the parents, they thought that was the most ridiculous and dumb thing in the world. Like, what are y'all doing? Like, what
Yeah.
at that, in that time, that's in the 80s. So they thought it was some kind of uh, like Zen, I guess, yoga, whatever you would call it. I don't know, but they thought it was crazy, and it worked so well for me. I know, and I'm sure it worked for others too. I just don't recall that long ago. But yeah, I think most of my stuff it was all mental, man. It was all mental stuff.
Yeah.
But see, that goes back to, again, man, and you don't see this anymore. At least I'm sure you have some here and there, but like I've told you, man, my dad would take me in the yard and we'd do 500 ground balls. Or if I was, pitching I pitched for a few years where I would pitch and pitch and pitch and pitch. And I mean, I had so much repetition in my practice at home with my dad that I never really had to worry about anything in the games or practice. It was just going through the same things I did at home. Right. So I think that it's such a huge miss nowadays, is like, they don't have the ability to get over the things at practice or at games the way that I was able to, because my dad was forcing me to practice. Like, his thing was like, if I decided I was going to play this sport and I really loved it, he was going to get me out there and work with me every single day. So I didn't really have a lot of chances to make mistakes, or I guess I had chances. I didn't really make a lot of mistakes, when it comes to errors or striking out looking. Like, I didn't do that kind of stuff because my dad ingrained it into me that wasn't, that wasn't acceptable in baseball.
Yeah. I mean, that's such a powerful point too, though, that, for you to grow up with that, right? Having that type of reinforcement and encouragement for the mental side of things. And I think today, like, even though, like, mental health just in general is getting a little bit more attention, and I bet most major league teams and D1 colleges probably have a sports psychologist on board. I still think that whenever it comes to the younger athletes, parents don't understand the point. They think like, oh no, they just need to, the physical practice right now, and then that stuff will come later. But it's not, and you're a perfect example of that. It has to be trained, and that's really like what I want to do with my skill sync mental performance training is teaching people that the mental and the physical side has to go hand in hand. I mean, that's the whole point. Training like that complete system of the, you know, the brain and the body at the same time.
Well, and the you know, almost every single parent, even myself, will bring our kids to trainers and all this stuff, and you may not see them. And I'm not, you know, I'm not talking down on any trainers out there, but the fact is like there's something to be said for, or like the organic practicing at home, working with yourself, and getting over, you know, like when I was taking ground balls, if I made an error, I just did it again and did it again. Nobody said, hey, you're doing this wrong, you need to set up this way. It was just organic, right? You just kept going until you figured it out. And I think nowadays we've gotten into this like, oh, you've got to set your body up. And I do it too as a coach. I do it too, right? Is your body needs to set up this way. Your leg, this right leg needs to be over here. That's right. But it's like there's something to be said for that organic practicing in the yard, going over it. And as you make a mistake, you just keep going. Like you don't feel bad about it. You just keep going.
Yeah.
And that's not happening now.
No. And that is such a great point too. Like if you think of I think we've talked about this a little bit, but think of like learning to walk, right? A kid learning to walk, they don't quite have the verbal ability to be taught that, right? Like, hey, you got to engage your core, you got to keep your feet. They just do it, right? And pretty much every human figures it out. And if you look at like our ability to walk, most of us are experts. It takes time, and there's a lot of mistakes. It takes time. There's a lot of mistakes. There's pain. There's injuries, right? Kids hit the coffee table and then they have the big thing on their head. You're frozen with your hand on your hat. Whoa. Can you hear me? Can you see me?
Yeah. I got you. I'm sure it's my connection.
It is. Dang it, connection. But anyway, it's the same thing. Like, why is it any different for learning the skill of baseball? You're going to get better. You're going to improve your coordination. You're going to learn the moves. So, like, just kind of stop it with all of the verbal stuff and just go through that repetition, like you're saying. However, it is going back to mindful repetition, though, right? So it's making sure the mind is in the game. But yeah, we're not going to spend too much time on biomechanics for younger athletes, which really gets us into all this stuff with the movement assessments these days. And just as much as you and I like movement assessments, and I did my doctoral research on movement assessments, you kind of like take a step back and think, what's the point? What's the point of having all this data on a 10-year-old?
Yeah. You know, it's funny because I go back and forth, right? And I'm sure you do too, is like you see somebody moving incorrectly on a baseball field. Like like let's say you have a kid that grew a foot, in the last 6 months, and I have examples of this, and they can't move the same way anymore, right? So they're stumbling over their feet when they're trying to catch a ground ball. But now that I'm thinking of it, like I've gone through so many different just visual assessments with him and having him trying to change certain things, but then also thinking now, like, why not just hit him 100 ground balls?
Yeah.
Well, he'd probably figure it out that way faster than me trying to change all his movement patterns because they're so wonky right now anyway. It's not like neurological systems going all over the place trying to figure things out. And it's like make it more simple and just hit them more ground balls. Yeah.
There's, you and I have done quite a bit in corrective exercise, and there's always a thought or a question or a consideration when working with athletes. Like, what is the role of a corrective exercise specialist when working with an athlete? And I've always kind of thought of it as like, we're like the pit crew of a race car, to where our job is when that athlete comes in for physical training, specific physical training, our job is to work to kind of reset those patterns, right? To reteach that coordination, stability, whatever. However, the reason we do that is so whenever they're on the baseball field, they can move incorrectly. They can move with less than ideal biomechanics and still be safe because we've trained so much in kind of like this specific range, if that makes sense. It conditions them. Think of like ACL injuries, like an ACL injury. Or if it's a non-contact injury, that's never something that happens just on one incident, right? One incident of the knee rotating in is not going to damage the ACL. That happens whenever it's time after time after time after
Yeah.
time. So that's kind of the thing, right? Physical training, we're to condition them following the proper biomechanics. That's going to keep their ligaments and tendons and everything healthy. So without on the field, they can do that stuff, and it's going to reduce their chances of injury out there. But anyway, so your point there, baseball is playing baseball, and then you can have corrective exercise or training being the physical training, and you kind of create that separation, especially with younger athletes, to where on the field, like, let's work on the repetition of the skills and the mindfulness and all of that. In the gym or in the club or whatever, that's where we'll be more biomechanics focused. Sorry, that sounded like a lot of rambling.
No, that was good. That was good. Yeah.
Super,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yep. You have something on your shoulder?
Just pat myself on the back. Good job, Kyle.
Oh.
I'm going to put that in my journal. Kyle did a good job on the podcast today.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk? You mentioned the genetic stuff. You want to talk about that? I don't know where we are on time. We could go on forever on the genetics thing too, but we can get started.
Yeah. So, as coaches and as players at the higher levels, we always talked about how weird pitchers were, right? Oh, our meeting is at the end of the scheduled time.
Yeah, but we're good, just because I had it scheduled from 11 to 12, so it's just a notification.
Oh, okay. We always talked about how weird pitchers were. We made fun of them. It was all fun, and made fun in a back then you could make fun of people, and it wasn't offensive. It was they would snap back too, right? But as I've coached little kids, I've noticed that there's definitely a personality trait that comes with pitching. Now, of course, you always have your outliers, right? You always have your outliers, but for the most part, you have these guys that are just more cold to emotions, and they don't really seem to feel emotions. We have a couple kids on our team right now that they don't have an issue. Like, you're working as a whole with a team, right? And as a team, we have an issue with mental performance. All teams do, and it's working on it and trying to get past it and teaching them the tools to get better at it. But there are a few here and there that, like, it's almost like they are more robotic. Like, if you look at a Shohei Ohtani's like that, nothing ever gets to the guy. Like, he's just very, very robotic with everything that he does. Very even keel. And at a younger age, lead me to believe, it's like a personality trait or genetic or something's in there that they don't feel it. Melissa's that way, bro. Like, she doesn't play baseball. She never did. It's not athletic.
You're so fuzzy. You're so fuzzy right now. Just like
Did that help?
Just like a pixely. Nope.
Does that help?
No, dancing doesn't help.
It doesn't help.
No. You could try turning your video off if you wanted to, but don't hang up on the phone call. Or we can just keep it like this. That's a little bit better right there.
You can hear me well?
I can. It's a little bit choppy, but I can hear you okay.
Melissa's that way a lot. Emotions don't get to her that much. She's very, very, very straight line, very even killed, no highs, no lows. It's very, You know, the ups
Yeah.
and downs are really, really closer together, right? Um, but when coaching little kids and you see that, it makes you wonder how they're that way at such a young age. And to bring it back to Chad was always that way. And it's funny because a lot of these pitchers, they come across as jerks
Yeah. Oh yeah.
because,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know, and a lot of people think that about Chad, but he's not. He's a great guy at the core. It's just he doesn't show emotions, and he's always been black white. Like even with his club, I've heard from a lot of parents from back home that will say that Chad's organization did him wrong or whatever. All this crap, right, from parents and even coaches. But the fact is that in business and as a pitcher, you got to be that way, right? And that's where I think I struggled in business was I was too caring to others and not stern enough, and gave too much as far as monetarily, like gave too much, right? And I think that's why he's successful in his business is because of that personality trait that he has of he doesn't let anything get to him and he just keeps moving forward and he charges what he charges. He built his teams the way he wants to build his teams and it works, for him. And that's why he was a successful pitcher too, is like he had that same mentality.
Yeah. So like whenever you say stuff doesn't bother them, do you know it doesn't bother them? Like
No,
maybe,
I
and
mean,
I'll tell you with my wife, Candy, she oftentimes acts like stuff doesn't bother her, but come to find out, it actually does. She just doesn't show it. And then I kind of wonder, like, is it the same way? Maybe they just have a better way of dealing with it internally, where they don't show it on the surface.
could be. I mean, it could be. I just
So
wonder because now that I'm seeing it at a younger age with kids, like, is it something? I mean, you could say it's a learned behavior, but like at the same time, it's like it's almost like you see it at 3 and 4 years old. So is it already a learned behavior at that level?
I don't know that you really see it at 3 and 4. I would argue that just because how do they know at 3 and 4? At 3 and 4, they shouldn't necessarily know the difference between positive and negative per se. They would know the difference between like falling and hitting their knee and it hurting and not falling, and then like make the be able to deduce that not falling is better. But I don't know that at that age they really have the experience to be able to put things into a specific context. What I wonder about somebody like Brock too, and this is, we'll just see what happens, right? But he's that way now, but I feel like it's very unlikely he'll always be that way. Now he will have a greater chance of always being that way because you're his dad and you're the way you are, right? And you were raised the way you were, right? So you know more things to set up a more an environment that's more encouraging of being like that. Um, but I would think if he were the son of anyone else, who knows, right? It would get to a point where, yes, he did start to feel those emotions, and maybe it's around, puberty or something like that happens, and then it's like a flip switches, a switch flips, whichever one, a switch flips, and all of a sudden he is getting emotional about it. Does that make sense? Because I really think from a genetic perspective, we can look at physical things we can look at physical things that are driven by genetics, such as height and weight and muscle composition and those types of things where it can make a difference. Whenever it comes to the mental side, I really think it's like 95% environment. Um, I really do. Yeah. If not 98% environment.
But okay, but why can you take, let's say you take a kid to, because see, the reason why, so when you say like he may not always be like that, but if you watch a kid from 3, 4, 5, 6 years old, that's like that all the way through college, pro ball, like with Chad, I knew him at 12, 11. So I don't remember. He probably knows the age better, but with Chad, he's been that way his whole life.
Yeah.
And like if I look at Brock, if he's that way from now until forever, until until he's old.
I would still, Brock specifically, I would still have to say it's so much environment because of you and
But why?
Melissa and
But,
Chad. I don't know. I don't know how Chad was. Can you hear me? Okay. I don't know how Chad was raised. Was he raised in an environment that really focused on mental stuff, or was he like every other kid and he is actually just different? Whoa, hello.
sorry, my
You're fine.
a screen came up. Yeah. So, I mean,
Dang it, I can't hear you.
we
Cutting out.
always say that Brock's learning from Max, right?
Yeah.
We could always say that. With Chad, I mean, I don't want to speak for him, but he didn't grow up in a good environment, and maybe that's why he is the way he was.
Yeah. Like I don't. The what am I trying to say here? Like I don't necessarily know how to word it. I don't know Chad at all, right? So I don't want to like think
Yeah.
put do anything change the context or the way anybody might view him. Any of our 2 subscribers might view him, but and learning this through my wife and what she does in psychology, childhood trauma has such a huge impact on everything, our emotional systems, our belief systems, our whatever.
Yeah.
So I would think like if there was something that did that, that very much could have been a driver in the way he thinks. And maybe, let's say absence of Chad, just, general somebody else. You take a kid that maybe loses their father. And there's some good studies on this too of I like case studies, but of people that have lost their father as in they passed away at an early age and how they excel because there is this sense of fear, this sense of I got to do it now, this sense of it's all on me. And so you'd kind of think like something like that, like if somebody's dad departed at an early age, it might be this mental toughness that develops because the emotional system is maybe just drained, but then also thinking like I'm going to show him or her, or, something like that really is not a healthy driver, but it could very much be a driver of performance.
Would you also say so? Like, let's say we did take 70% of pitchers and put them into that bucket. And this is a just a thought. Let's say 70% of pitchers we consider that way, right? Very even keel, very seeming to be emotionless, what I call very quirky, because you could talk to anybody in the baseball world and they're going to tell you, man, most pitchers are so quirky, right? If you take them and put them into a bucket, do you think that is all of their case? It's either environmental, it's the way that they were trained, or is there not some sort of genetic factor that leads to pitchers being that way?
I think that would be a tough one really to answer because there can be like thinking of genes, right? There can be a collection of genes, that interact together in a specific way, and then certain behaviors or environmental factors can turn those genes on or off. Right. So the whole idea of epigenetics. And so that's what I would think is think of this, and this is going to take it a little bit more on the physical side, which is not the way we're going. But hand-eye coordination, that's something I hear across the board, right? Like all pitchers, all quarterbacks, all of this particular type of an athlete, they have improved hand-eye coordination, and that's genetic. No way to change it. And after they did the whole human genome project and they mapped all this stuff out, there is a collection of genes that are related to improved hand-eye coordination. But you take 2 kids that are born, one kid has the collection of genes, the other kid doesn't. these genes over here still have to be turned on, right? So if he's grown up in a place where sports is not valued and they don't do this and they don't do that, he's never going to be able to demonstrate that improved hand-eye coordination. To where this other kid, he might not have those genes, but he grows up in an environment that values sports and he plays with his friends and he ends up doing very, very well. So using that as kind of like a framework, the same could be said for some personality things, as you could be born with these certain characteristics, but the environment brings those out or not. And so maybe there is
Yeah.
something, and like in Chad, it was just turned on at an early age and he was really able to build on top of it. Does that make any kind of sense?
Yeah. That makes perfect sense. Yeah.
But I do think it's interesting. And you think too of things like extrovert, introvert, being a deeper thinker versus not. That could play a big part of it, right? You take, if most pitchers are a bit introverted, like maybe there is that, they spend a lot of time with themselves, especially whenever we were younger.
Yeah.
You did have to sit and think, right? You couldn't distract yourself with YouTube or TikTok. So there could be that being a personality trait that just happened to work very well, or happens to work very, very well for a pitcher.
Yeah. Yeah. I can definitely see that because they're different, bro. They're different.
Yeah. Yeah. It could be that. But what's that movie we watched? Was it called Fastball? But where they're talking about, was it Randy Johnson? That I don't know what the
Oh,
game
yeah.
was. Yeah, I don't know
Yeah.
what the game was, right? But he still had that same thought of like, what happens if I mess this up? And then in that, it's like, I think he was the one where he said, no matter if I strike this guy out or he gets a home run, I'm going to be fishing tomorrow morning, regardless of what happens here. And then, use that thought to kind of reframe. And I think he did end up striking the guy out, winning the game or whatever. I think I
Yeah.
say that to say, like, yeah, I bet there are some people that have just really developed this mental toughness to where they don't feel it. But we see so many other guys that do feel it, but they're still able to perform.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things where, like, you talk about all this and they don't even realize it, right? So they don't realize they're actually working on that stuff,
Yeah, yeah,
especially like when you talk about environmental and all that kind of stuff. Like they don't know that,
yeah,
until maybe later in life.
yeah, yeah.
It makes
Um,
sense.
and that's really like the whole premise of the stuff of mental toughness. If you look at some of the work they did with people in the military, where an idea, and that's kind of where the idea of mental toughness stems from. But it would be, these guys would be conditioned in such harsh environments, surrounded by death and the worst things imaginable, and to be exposed to that, your emotional system has to shut off certain things, right? You just can't feel it because you're not going to be able to perform. That's also why a lot of people in the military have a tough time reintegrating back into society, because that
Yeah.
mental toughness, right? They've like blocked certain emotions and maybe enhanced certain others. But that is a thing. So if you see like trauma early on, it has the same effect of maybe blunting emotional responses in some cases. And then they maybe just sustain that for life if they're never, if it doesn't become severe enough where it impacts their daily life, then they never need to seek treatment.
Yeah, you see that with athletes too, right? I mean, you see athletes that come into the world after playing, let's say, 20 years, and they don't know what to do with themselves, and they end up, drugs, whatever,
Yeah,
all
yeah,
kinds of crazy stuff. Same thing.
yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yep.
Mm.
All right, buddy. I think that's a good stopping point. What do you think?
Okay. Yeah,
It's
yeah,
good.
that was good.
This is Yeah, this is sure gonna help me have a much better day.
Yeah, hopefully I go out there and Frederick's lamp is working.
You can. Yep. Yep. Yep.
All
All
right,
right, man.
brother.
Good talk. Yeah, until next time.